Hi, this is J.D. Ingram of the Charleston Pipe Band, and I want to welcome you to my series on how to be a great piper in 3 steps. As a refresher, here is the tree diagram for our 3 easy steps. Stay tuned as we dive into today's topic.
Dress and deportment, because looking sharp is necessary. So what's the deal with dress and deportment? Well, people often hear with their eyes, so to speak. What I mean by that is if somebody sounds like they know what they're doing, but they don't look like they know what they're doing, people will have a worse perspective sometimes than if the converse was true. If they look like they know what they're doing, but they sounded mediocre. Of course, we're trying to be good at both. But how do you look like what you know what you're doing? Well, first, dress for the occasion. Showing up to a funeral or a wedding, if you're playing for one of these important ceremonial events, and not wearing a tie, not wearing a kilt, not wearing anything that indicates that you're there and that you have respect for the proceedings of the day, that can really leave people with a sour taste in their mouth. I've seen people post online, hey, is it normal to expect a bagpiper wears a kilt? I just had a guy show up to my dad's funeral wearing khakis and a polo shirt. Like, come on, dude. That's unprofessional. Second of all, have good posture, both carrying your instrument properly and standing up straight. This is something that I'll see is fairly common, especially it seems like teenage boys who are very talented musicians tend to stand up there like they're in line at the DMV or at a fast food restaurant, kind of slouched over with one hip cocked out, clearly not taking the event seriously. This is one thing where I think the military and martial tradition of bagpipes lends itself to that formality of kind of standing at attention, that a little bit of that prim and properness. And then, of course, the last one, when it comes to dress and deportment, is marching or tapping your foot when it's appropriate. You don't have to, but if you're leading or if you're moving, you should be doing something with your feet in time. And if it's not an appropriate time to be moving or marching, stand still. The drills: practice marching, test out our pipes, make sure we can have good posture, and we'll also go through some of the do's and don'ts of dress. First up, let's talk about posture. So this is an example photo I found online of a bagpiper who has pretty good posture. As you can see, the blow stick meets his mouth at a fairly comfortable angle. His head is held high and straight. He's not looking left, right, up, or down. He's looking straight ahead. He's standing fairly square to the camera. His spine appears to be fairly straight, and the chanter you can see is fairly straight as well, almost lined up with his spine or his midline, maybe just a little bit off center. His hands approach his chanter at fairly comfortable looking angles. You can see there's not a big crick in either wrist. They're not bent at too weird of an angle. The drones sit comfortably from his shoulder down his bicep. They're not too widely spread. And then the bag is seated up underneath his bicep and maybe just a little bit into the forearm, but the bag does not come all the way down anywhere close to the wrist, where he would have to be using his wrist muscles or his hand muscles on the bag as well as on the chanter. So that frees up the hands to focus on the musical task while the arm is handling the bag, and then your body, again, talking straight up and down. Another thing you might notice is the chanter and the bass drone, both kind of in that almost straight up and down, maybe at a slight angle. Not a whole lot of wildly off to one side or another. This next example, this piper, is another one I found online. We've got a good side view here of a woman who appears to be performing. She might be marching. Again, you can see a good, fairly straight up and down posture, not a significant lean forwards or backwards. The bag is seated fairly highly up. The bag clearly ends well before her wrist. The blowpipe, you can see, reaches her mouth at a comfortable angle, and it appears to be an adjustable blowpipe, which is nice. For some people have trouble finding the right length or shape of blowpipe, so an adjustable can be a good option for people who just need a little bit more play. The other thing to really notice from this angle is the angle of the drones. You'll see some pipers, when you look at them side on, the drones point almost straight up and down, and others, they point almost horizontal. Both of those extremes have their own issues. This is kind of the ideal, in my opinion, is about 45 degrees. I see a lot of pipers, good pipers tend to be 45 degrees up to maybe 30 degrees off of vertical. So a little more straight up and down than this, but not significantly. It's fairly rare for a ceremonial bagpiper to be leaning the pipes way, way back. And if you lean them too far up, then you run the risk of them actually falling off your shoulder, falling forwards. Conversely, we have a bad example. I found this photo is labeled a costume of a bagpiper, and it's very apparent that this person is not a bagpiper. I'm pretty sure that those bagpipes are fake. They may not make any noise at all. You can see the cords are on wrong. The cords are extremely widely set. The drones are way down on his forearm. The bag appears to come down to about his wrist. The chanter is way off center and really low. He's kind of leaning a little bit. The bass drone is sticking almost straight up while the tenors are sticking out to the side. All of these things just look really uncomfortable to me. So do your best to avoid this. A lot of people, the adjustments that you might find yourself needing to make quickly are setting your drones a little more narrow so that they stay up on your bicep or shoulder and, kind of close together and at the same angle, adjusting your blow stick, either length or an adjustable angle or something like that so that it meets your mouth at a comfortable angle and you're not having to cock your head to the side. And then adjusting your bag size or length. There's extended length bags as well that you can check into so that once the bag is seated well up under your arm, it's not so big that it takes your whole arm to wrap around it. It's not so small that your wrists are crimped and bent at an unnatural angle, and that your chanter can fall at a good position, remembering back to that first photo, almost vertical, almost in line with your spine. Next up, let's talk about marching. If marching is new to you, the first thing you're going to want to practice is marking time. That is, marching in place or just picking up your foot and putting it right back down where it was. You could even think about it as tapping your foot to the music, but alternating which foot gets tapped. Watch here as I mark time. One of the first things to practice is tapping along with a metronome, or a very simplistic steady beat. Next, try upping the ante by marking time to actual recordings of music. Keep doing this until it feels so natural to walk along to music that it feels awkward not to. I'm reminded of this comic from xkcd.com. Okay, that's how we get started with marching. To review, just practice moving your feet. If you can't tap your toe in time, definitely start there. But if you can, practice marching in place, marking time, first with a simple beat, probably a metronome, then with more complex things like marching to music. Then you can take it a step further by practicing maybe playing grace notes on your practice chanter, then the scale, then a full tune, and then you take your next step, practice taking your first step, making sure that heel hits on the beat. After you've got that first step consistently hitting, continue on through the same cycle again, starting with the metronome, then maybe grace notes, the scale, full tunes. Once you've got all of that down on your practice chanter, you can take the next step of applying it to the bagpipes. Now you've got to worry about the bag, blowing, squeezing, playing the tune, marking time, taking the first step, marching in place, marching back and forth. So it's a skill that builds. It doesn't come naturally to everybody, but hopefully with a couple days of focused practice, you can make sure that you are in step, on time, marching, that you look like you know what you're doing, you're holding yourself well. And then of course, we're applying those principles of good posture we talked about before. And next, we talk about the principles of good dress to go along with our deportment.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what to wear. So starting from the bottom up, we've got footwear. For 90% of you at 90% of gigs, the appropriate footwear is ghillie brogues. This is standard, everything from most day gigs, casual, semi-formal, all the way up to black tie events. You can get away with wearing ghillie brogues. If you want to go with a military style footwear, you can cover any sort of black shoes with spats. Spats are typically worn with diced kilt hose as seen in this picture. That is for a military style uniform only. If you're not wearing black shoes with spats or specifically ghillie brogues, then there are a few opportunities where you might wear a casual shoe of some sort or boots. Those are mostly for casual gigs only, or if you're playing with like a rock band or something. But ghillie brogues or spats covers the vast majority of formal gigs. Moving up the leg, we get to your kilt hose. If you're not wearing diced hose under spats, then you're probably wearing plain colored piper's hose. The array of colors that are available nowadays include really pretty much any color and any shade you want. Maybe 10 years ago, and dating back into the 80s, pretty much everybody wore plain white. That has fallen out of favor stylistically. It's not in fashion to wear plain white anymore. Most people will wear some darker shade, but nothing wrong with wearing plain white if you want. At the top of your hose, you might find flashes. Flashes started out as a way to keep your hose from falling down. Now that elastics and polyesters have gotten better, we don't really need them, but it's a tradition to wear a little flash of color underneath your sock rolled over. If your flashes are tartan, make sure they match your kilt. Don't wear your black watch flashes in your Royal Stuart kilt. That looks silly. If they're a plain color, again, make sure they match. They should be worn on the outside of your legs. So plain color or tartan. Around the same point, you might be wearing a skendoo, the black knife tucked into the sock of your dominant side with a little jeweled or carved or otherwise fancy hilt sticking out. Skendoos are pretty much appropriate for any type of gig. If there's a venue that doesn't allow you to carry a knife, you can, of course, invest in a skendoo that carries no blade. There are ones that are completely just for looks, and I've even seen people who go hardcore and tattoo the knife onto the side of their leg. To each their own, I guess. Moving up the kilt, onto the kilt now, we have the kilt pin. Kilt pins are really a pretty personal choice. You don't have to have a kilt pin. Some people wear the simple, large safety pin just to weigh the front apron down. Most people will wear some variation of the sword with a symbol, either a family symbol or something like the stag's head or the thistle of Scotland on it. Other people will have something more personal, like the firefighter's axe there, or something more avant-garde and artistic, like the wooden carved thing on the top left of the screen, or the fancy artistic stag's head on the bottom right. Do whatever you like. Kilt pins are a fairly personal choice. Going up to the top of the kilt, we'll have a chain to hold our sporran in place. The chain's an interesting opportunity to fancy things up just a little bit. The standard chain, as seen on the top left, is part leather strap, part plain chain, but you can get fancy chains with designs in them or sometimes even jewels in them. The more ornate, the more formal it tends to go. So a plain chain is appropriate for everything. A ornate chain would be appropriate for pretty much anything ceremonial. And if you're getting to the point where you're playing for the royal wedding, you probably want to have an ornate or even jeweled chain. The sporran itself, again, the idea is the more ornate, the more formal, with the most simple being plain leather with a fold-over top. This is appropriate for any sort of day wear, casual gigs, outside, in the sunshine. Make sure the leather matches your belt and shoes and overall color pattern, so that bright red or dark brown would not necessarily go with kilts that were like neon yellow, like the McLeod. So keep in mind your color selections, but plain leather is appropriate for casual outdoor day type gigs. You can fancy them up a little bit by adding tassels, and a step up from there would be going into ornate leather work or adding a little bit of fur, but still with the fold over top. At this point, we're getting into semi-formal or business level of attire, business casual, or even some weddings and things like that. If you want to take things up to a solid black tie, then definitely fur with the open top style is the fanciest level of sporrans. And a lot of pipers will do a piper sporran that's in the middle. It'll have the open top with ornate leather work, but no tassels. A lot of pipers prefer that because tassels will clang around while marching, and so it's nice to have something that doesn't make sound while you're marching. So this is a nice kind of in the middle. It's got the fancy top, but it's got a slightly plainer bottom. Really, it's a good choice for pipers because it's versatile for any sort of gig. With the sporrans, of course, you can go in other directions, such as the horsehair sporran, which is a specifically military style and should only be worn if you're wearing a military type getup, or if you're doing some sort of reenactment or just want to go off the wall and you feel like you're somebody who can pull it off, get yourself an animal head sporran. I personally don't think I would ever wear an animal head sporran, but again, to each their own. And then, of course, the belt. A plain, thick leather belt with a belt buckle to keep it in place is pretty standard. Again, keep in mind, the more ornate, the more formal. So you can get some leather work etched on your belt. That would be a little more formal than plain leather. You can get a fancier belt buckle. Black or brown leather should match your sporran and your shoes ideally. And if you're going with something that is more reenactment based or fitting a specific vibe, like in a rock band, you could maybe do one of these alternative type belts with the double buckles or with the archaic looking buckles or whatever the option is for you. I oftentimes will wear a police belt that's got a slightly different looking buckle as an option because of my band's police history. It's your choice. So that's the primary accessories that we're talking about. With the rest of the uniform, there is a variety of ways you can take it. The military orders of dress is a great place to start to get some inspiration. If you look at the front of the Scots Guards Volume 1, they carry us through the Scots Guards, starting with the full dress. So here's a full dress. You can see the piper is wearing spats. He's wearing a horsehair sporran. He's got the full army jacket, doublet, tunic with the plaid over his shoulder and the feather bonnet, the big tall hat with all the extra ostrich feathers hanging on the side. Very formal, very military in style. So this is something that you could do if you're part of a military unit or if you're playing an extremely serious ceremony. It's certainly not necessary for most private gigs, and if you're not in the military, it's a lot to invest in. Also, in warmer climates, it may look overdone, so keep that in mind. A step down from there is the number 1, where they get rid of the feather bonnet, but otherwise the uniform is pretty similar. Then moving on down to the number 2, they get rid of the plaid and some of the extra belts and sashes around the upper body. This is a good place to start, I think, for most type of casual gigs that civilian pipers might wear. This is an approachable level of formality. You can carry it on down. They have the number 3, which has the dress whites. They bring the plaid back for that. And the jungle attire in the military style. See, they've swapped out their spats for plain shoes, white socks, got rid of the horsehair sporran, but still a formal top. Looking at the bands, there is, of course, a military style college band, the Citadel here, wearing their dress whites, similar to the Scots Guards number 3. A lot of civilian bands on the formal end of things will wear a vest and a jacket with the formal sporran, as we can see here. This looks very sharp. I think this would be appropriate for everything up to black tie events. If you were the piper hired, you could certainly take some inspiration here. This might be a little overkill for a casual gig, especially in a warmer climate. The jacket could be a little hot, but looks pretty sharp. Of course, we've got another opportunity here. This looks fairly similar, maybe just a touch toned down with the black sporrans that look like leather instead of fur, but otherwise pretty sharp here. Taking it a step further down, getting rid of the jacket, but keeping things fairly formal otherwise. You can see he has the fancy chain, a nice piper sporran, a shirt that is kind of a color-coded to match his kilt. I think that looks pretty sharp. So thinking through, being careful about what you choose and choosing things that look good together. Stepping down another layer, we could go to a slightly less formal chain on the sporran. The white shirts seem a little more casual. This is a pretty common pipe band look here. Further down from that, going to short sleeve shirts and losing the vest, they've got slightly more casual sporrans. But this is a band that has a casual look, still wearing a tie though, I think is important to note. Still trying to look fairly sharp. And really, if you're going to go any more casual than this, it's probably for something that is a specific look, something like a reenactment or something like a rock band. Take an inspiration from the quite famous Piper Alley here with her corset top, still in a kilt, still in a sporran, but leggings or tights or whatever instead of the kilt hose. No tie, right? She's got a definite kind of punk rock look here, but keeping the kilt, keeping the sporran, still very clearly here to play pipes for you. Another option that is a little out of the norm would be switching the kilt out for tartan trews. I think tartan trews can be a very sharp look if you're sticking it with a top like this fellow has, but they do also run the risk of abuse. Be careful not to over tartan. Tartan trews plus a tartan jacket kind of looks like you're a billboard for a tartan shop. I would say one or the other, but not both. Personally, tartan is a very loud pattern. So keep those thoughts in mind. Pick your headwear, your tartan, the colors of your accessories, both from like a tie and flashes standpoint, and the leather, the belt, the spoor, and the shoes, and the level of formality. The more metal, the more fur, the more intricate leather work, the fancier it is. So just like you wouldn't show up to a casual picnic in a tuxedo, and you wouldn't show up to somebody's fancy dinner party in flip-flops and a bathing suit. Just pay attention to what you're wearing, and people will be sure to understand that you look like you know what you're doing, and will be much more likely to believe that you sound like you know what you're doing.
Thanks again for watching, guys. As a reminder, we've been talking about step 3 of 3. Have good presentation. Part 2, dress well, focused on not too much, not too little, and matching, as well as part 3, deportment, talking about your posture and your marching. And the bottom line is, look like you know what you're doing. Take care, guys.